Alright, so my goal with this video is to hopefully help you plan a wilderness photography trip. So generally what I like to do is, before I even begin planning the photography trips, I like to kind of do a process to where I figure out the subject first, which in this case is going to be a mountain range. And then from that point, figure out an access point. In other words, a place to get a good view to photograph the subject, and then from there determine kind of the mode of transportation of how to get there, specifically how to get there for golden hours, the sunrise and sunset. And then once you figure that out, that'll most likely determine what kind of trip it's going to be, whether it's going to be a road trip, car camping, day hike, whatever it is. In this particular case, the trip called for an overnight backpacking trip, and I'll show you why once we get into it as to why it called for that. So if you are interested in planning your own overnight stay of a backpacking trip for photography, this video should hopefully really help you out in terms of planning it. But even if not, I'll show a lot of differences of planning a hike or going on any sort of hike, to where if you're interested in any sort of photography, even if it's just on your, on your cell phone for Instagram, or if you're just interested in more grand, kind of bigger views versus kind of the normal hiking trips that are already laid out for you, especially if you're doing overnight stuff, then hopefully you can get something from this video to help you out with that. So we're going to jump on the computer here, and I'm going to show you, first I'm going to show you how I planned it all, and then I'm going to show you footage of me actually out in the field doing the trip itself, and then we'll follow back here after that. All right, so looking at the computer here, I'm going to show you now. So as I mentioned before, the first step would be finding your subject, and I already knew in this particular case what my subject was going to be, because there's a certain mountain range I had in mind that I've heard good things about. I've only explored a little bit, and so I was really looking forward to exploring it more and specifically photographing it. So I already knew my subject before I even started planning this trip. So the next step would be to find a good point of access. What I mean by that is a good place physically in order to photograph this particular mountain range in this case. So that's what we're going to look for next. So if you look at the computer here, I usually like to open up two different websites and use them back and forth. First one is Gaia GPS, and the second one is going to be Google Earth. So to start out with whatever GPS, again, I use Gaia, but whatever GPS you're using, we're going to find on the topo map wherever the subject is. And then we're also going to find that on Google Earth as well. So you can find the subject on either one first, and we're just going to copy and paste the GPS coordinates. So in this particular case, I know on the topo map it's right here where I'm looking for. So it's this mountain range right here. So if you didn't know that, you can search it again, either in the GPS or on Google Earth. You can most likely just search whatever your subject is and it'll bring you right to it. The subject in this particular trip is going to be this mountain range right here. And so we're just going to click anywhere on here, get the GPS coordinates, which are right here. You can click this button which copies it, and then go over to Google Earth and paste the coordinates and hit search, and it'll bring us right to it. Now I did this trip a few days ago and I already planned it. I'm going to go over how I did all this with the route planning and everything, but just so you see all that for now, just kind of ignore that for now in this stage. So we're going to pretend like we're planning this trip from scratch. Here we're looking at the mountain range, or the subject that we're hoping to shoot for this trip. The next step of what I would like to do is try to find good access points and then see how we can get there, and then kind of plan the trip backwards from there. So subject, how to get there, and then from there you can start planning backwards the logistics to figure everything out. So the next step again would be finding out a good access point to photograph these mountains. So you can just kind of look around on Google Earth to see kind of what we're looking at here. So here we see, so this is a main road right here. So we can kind of look at that and see where the roads are. And then from there, kind of get at least a very general idea of where we might be able to get into. But again, we're not worried too much about access yet. We're more worried about the spot itself, of where would be the ideal best spot in order to photograph these mountains. All this green all along here in the lower valleys and everything, we probably are not going to want to look in there, because not only is it going to be too low most likely to shoot these mountains, but also too, you're going to be in the trees. So there's not going to be a lot of good photographic opportunities there. So where you want to look for is like features like this right here, like this peak right here, feature right here, right here. So as you can see, all these features that I'm showing you, there's some up here, but it's a little bit off the center of the mountain range here. But all of these here, so we can see they're slightly starting to be a little bit above tree line to where there's no trees up there. And they're up high well enough in order to get a good angle with the mountains. And they're just at the right distance in order to shoot either a wide angle, or you can get a telephoto going and you know, kind of scope out different areas of the mountain range. So these are the kind of features we're looking for to see potential access points. So from here, what we can do is we can start looking at each of these access points and just see which one would be the best, the easiest, I should say, to get to in order to photograph. So first we can look at this here, because this looks promising because it's above tree line. It's got a decent angle with the mountains. So we can take this little guy right here and place it down there, and it'll show you what it should look like at the ground level. So here there's no trees blocking the view. So these are pretty good views here for the mountain range. So there could be some very good photographic opportunities for this mountain range here. So what we're gonna do is exit ground view. If you hit U, it brings you straight up and down. So then we can go up here and hit edit, copy view location, and that will just give us GPS coordinates for this exact spot. And then we can go over to our GPS topo map here, and we can paste those exact coordinates into the map to see what this spot looks like on the topo map. So if we zoom out, we'll see that there's some trails going relatively close to this mound. So the trail looks like it goes right along here. So this is the trail here. And then we can look at to see if we can potentially get up on this mountainside. For this particular one, it looks like it's possible, but these lines are pretty close together, which means that this is a pretty steep slope here. And if we put on a layer here, that's called slope angle, it just gives us more of a visual of how, you know, you can tell with the topo map how close they are, but this gives you more of a visual, and this definitely verifies what we were thinking of this being relatively steep. So I wouldn't say that this access point's impossible. I'm sure we can figure out ways to get there. But for now, we're gonna look at those other few access points that we saw and see if we have any better options. But we'll keep this one in mind just in case, but I think we might be able to find something a little bit easier to get to. So we're gonna go back to Google Earth, zoom out, get a good angle again of the mountain range. And again, so the next one that I see here is the peak of Cameron Peak here. So this place would obviously be a great spot to photograph this mountain range here. So let's just, again, go down here. Doesn't matter where, we can hit U anywhere here. And then we're gonna copy and paste that view location again over to the GPS. And we're gonna see what that looks like. So here we can quickly see there's no real trails summiting the mountain itself, which usually there is, which is ideal if there's a switchback trail already made up to the mountain. In this particular case, it looks like there's not one. I'm sure that there's routes to get up here. We can look at mountaineering routes, things like that. But again, this looks really steep all around here, and there's no real trails up here. So again, if we really wanted to get up here, I'm sure that we could, but let's just keep looking to see if there's something a little bit easier first. So let's go back to Google Earth. Now the next one I see is this ridge right along here. So let's do the same thing. We can zoom in, again, hit U to look straight up and down, copy view location, and we're gonna find this on the GPS here, or on the topo map. All right, so let me go ahead and delete this route so we don't just keep getting confused here. The topo map from where we were looking at in Google Earth, that ridge right there, brings us to this spot right here. There's a few things that I noticed right off the bat here is that up top, it's really flat right here, which is great potentially for campsites and everything, but that's a little bit later on in the route planning. So what we're looking for now is we see that there's a trail right along here, which is great. And it looks like it actually switchbacks up this steep part right here, which is great. What we want to look for to see is if we can climb up here, because it looks like down here we're kind of, you know, still in the trees, but if we get up here, we'll have great access and viewpoints to this mountain range over here to the left. So just to see that on Google Earth here. And again, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this route as well on Google Earth. All right, so we can see the trail kind of in here on Google Earth, and we can see where it goes up along this, through this valley here. Again, what we're looking for here is to see if we can get up here onto this bridge. And so there's a few things that we can look at here. The first, obviously, is you just want to look overall on the topo map and see kind of where the easiest spot would be to climb up this ridge, if it's possible anywhere. Looking at this topo map, like in all these sections all along here, it's very steep. You can see these topo lines are very close together. So we probably don't want to look to climb anywhere up here, anywhere along here. Really anywhere on this ridge is very steep in most sections. But what I see here in this section right here is that doesn't look too steep to me. And again, just to get a different visual, we can put on this slope angle and kind of see. Again, this kind of verifies all along this ridge here, it looks very steep. But we have this section right here to where it doesn't look that steep really at all. What I'm gonna do, and it's right by the trail too, which is great. What I'd like to do, just to get a little bit of a visual in Google Earth, is that we can take a GPS coordinate of this spot right here and just kind of get a visual of what this might look like in real life. So here we can see the trail itself. So this is where the trail goes that we saw on Google Earth, and we have the ridge here to the right. So again, we're just gonna put our little guy down here at a ground level and kind of see what it looks like. Now here, this is great. No, we don't always get this lucky, but here we have actual pictures of this exact spot in the ground level here from the topo map. So this is absolutely great beta to have. So if we look at the actual mountain range itself here, we can obviously see that there's great opportunities for photography for this whole mountain range here. But what I would like to do, if possible, is climb up the ridge, which is in this direction. So we can just kind of get a quick little look here on the ground level. And again, you don't really know till you're there in person, but just looking at it here. So the main thing that I really wanted to see here, because you can get a really good idea of the steepness using a topo map, obviously is what it's made for. But I wanted to make sure that there wasn't super loose rock or anything, because even if like it's not that steep, if it's really steep or really slippery, loose rock, that could be tough. But this looks very solid all the way up here. So just looking at it from here, it really looks like we should be able to walk right up here, switch back right up here, no problem. And then once we're up here, it really flattens out. So it really seems like once we get up here in this level, we should be able to walk anywhere up and along this ridge and have great access point and views to this entire mountain range here. I think we've decided on our access point. Our access point hopefully is going to be right here. At this point, what I would like to do, so we can open up a kind of a notes page and then a to-do list in order to start really organizing this trip as we plan it. So let's go ahead and open up. I like to use whatever I like to use. I like it to be able to be on my my phone, so we can plan it on the computer, but I'd like it to go over to my phone so that I'm out in the field, I have all the information still from everything I researched. I'm in the Apple ecosystem, so I like using Apple Notes and reminders for my to-do list because it automatically uploads to the cloud, and also too, it automatically updates on my phone. So again, so we can have everything out in the field. So we're gonna go to Apple Notes here, and we're just gonna just put the name of the trip or anything here in the notes. And then I'm gonna open up reminders, and this is just gonna be kind of a to-do list. So having these two here, as we move along with this trip planning and as we go, we can kind of just put down notes and things that we need to do as we go to keep everything organized. And don't worry about formatting it to look real nice and pretty and organized for now, especially with the notes here. You can do all that later or not do it at all. I think the main thing is having the information down somewhere we have access to it at any point is the most important thing here. Okay, so now at this point in the trip planning process, we have determined our access point, which our access point is going to be somewhere right here along this ridge. So what we can do now, we can just create a quick waypoint here in order to mark this spot. So with Gaia, you just click where it's at and hit create waypoint. And we're gonna move it right here and just create, we're just gonna name it access point and save it there. So that's our access point that we're gonna try to get to in order to photograph this mountain range here. Now that we have our access point, what we wanna figure out next is how to get here, this access point, during golden hours, which is, sunrise or sunset. Once we determine how to get there for golden hours, that will determine our mode of transportation to get there, which will determine our type of trip that it's gonna be. And then from there, we can figure out if we have the skills, resources, and experience in order to get there safely. So the main thing we wanna do at first is get to this point right here, this grassy pass area on the trail. So we can just look at the topo map here and just kind of quickly scan and see where is the quickest point hiking. So it definitely looks like obviously we're gonna have to hike to get here. The closest road is here, and which is far away, so there's no sort of driving here in this area. And I see already right here that this is in a wilderness area. And I'm gonna make separate videos about the differences between wilderness areas and national forests and BLM land and national parks, because they're all United States public lands, but they're all kind of different in their own ways. Wilderness areas are great. Wilderness areas are great because there's no roads. I think it's only hiking and maybe horseback. So there's no quads, dirt bikes, nothing on wilderness areas. It's just foot traffic for the most part only. And another great thing about wilderness areas is you can hike and go anywhere you want here. You don't have to stay to the trail, and you can also camp anywhere you want. A lot of times there's certain rules, like within a certain bodies of water, not to camp within 200 feet, things like that. But for the most part, there's no reservations you need to make. You can camp, if you want to camp like on this ridge line up here, you can certainly do that. So wilderness areas for this are great. With wilderness areas, you need to have some self-sufficiency because usually they're in the middle of nowhere, there's no roads nearby. So that's the kind of the trade-off, is that you need to have skills and self-sufficiency to be out there comfortably and safely. But if you get those skills and resources, you can really reap the benefits, because you can be out here with no crowds and with amazing views and without reservations. You can camp basically wherever you want. So anyway, so we see it's in a wilderness area, so we kind of start to get an idea of what this trip may look like. And from what I'm looking at here, so the trails up here are a little bit farther away to the road. So it looks like probably our best spot to get here, again, to this area, is to do this trail starting from this. So this little TH right here, that means trailhead. From this trailhead, looks like if we do this route to here, would be our best bet to get here at the to the access point. What I like to do at this point is I see where the trailhead is here. I only have a 2-wheel drive vehicle and it's not high clearance. So what's important to me is to make sure first that I can even get to the trailhead itself, because if I can't, then I can either hike the road itself or at this point figure out a new trip to do. With this right here being a solid yellow line here, usually that means that it's a dirt road, so it's not paved. Like, so this road here where it's orange like this, that means it's paved. So this is a main county road, it's a paved road. Looks like this is a dirt road, but it's most likely not so bad to where you need a high clearance vehicle or 4-wheel drive. Usually those roads would kind of look like this, where they have dash lines. But just to be certain, so we're gonna do a few things here. So first we can just Google the name of the road itself to see if sometimes that brings us information. So here we have the road here. So yeah, sometimes, usually, especially when there's dispersed camping along the road, they'll have certain websites which are made for overlanding to where people can put reviews of the road. So here we can see that it's a dirt road. It's open seasonally, so which means it's closed during the winter, but we don't have to worry about that yet because right now it's September. That's pretty much all we got from that. But so you see here, it's a dirt road. So we're just looking through. So here's, okay, trails off road. So the road that we're looking at is an easy dirt road that was wide enough for 2 vehicles. During wet conditions, the road can be muddy. So that's pretty much what we were figuring from this. So this definitely clarified that if it, it's a dirt road most likely, but it's not too crazy where you need a 4-wheel drive or a high clearance vehicle. So I think if it's not raining for a long time before we go, I think we should be able to get there. I think we should be able to get to the trailhead itself, no problem. Another thing I like to try to do, especially if we're going to a trailhead itself, is to use a website called AllTrails, and I'm sure you've probably heard of this. I like to use AllTrails for beta on not only the trail itself, but a lot of times you can get really good beta on the roads, I found. So what I like to do is go into AllTrails and then hit this Explore here and look at the map to find the trailhead itself, where you can search it in the search bar. So let's go back up to where the trailhead was. So for this West Branch Trail here, it's going to be West Branch Trailhead. So let's go ahead and see if we can find that in AllTrails. And then we can get up-to-date reviews, most hopefully, of so we're gonna create our own custom route, but this will at least give us potentially beta on the road itself, and then also too for the trail, whether there's stream crossings. So if there's a really bad road to get there, or if there's big stream crossings or a bunch of down trees, I like AllTrails really uses that, or gives you that information a lot of time, because it's people every day reviewing that particular trail. For this, for example, we're not going to do the whole trail because that brings us here. We're going to try to go up here, but this will at least potentially give us beta for this whole first half of the trail and getting to the trailhead. So we can just look at the reviews and see if we can find anything. So here the parking lot's potentially busy on Tuesday, so that's good to know, to see if we need to get there early or not, especially if it's going to be on a weekend. Some muddy parts, nothing major. And then here we're starting to get into last year. So this isn't a super popular trail, I don't think, but at least there's nothing like really sticking out here to say that there's something really bad that's going to stop us from doing this in a timely manner. From that, I think we can at least definitely, I believe, get to the trailhead and find some decent parking there. So that's really good to know. So the next step I think would be, so let's create a route, a custom route in Gaia to get here, and then see how much mileage and elevation gain we're working with, to see if we can do this in a day hike or in an overnight backpacking trip. So we can just start here at the trailhead, and then under create you can hit route here. And then you just start basically clicking. So we click once here, and that creates the first kind of waypoint, and then you can move your mouse over here to see if so here it didn't really get that correctly. We wanted to go here first. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, and then here. So what I like to do is see how far you can get to save time, but if it is kind of populating in the wrong spot, you can kind of back up and put as many points as you need. Let's bring it here. So again, at this point, we'll zoom out a little bit to really see what we're doing here. All right, so again, see this camera waypoint here. That's where we're trying to get to in this access point. So we're going to continue following the trail to this point, and then we're going to bring it over here, and then bring it up to Grassy Pass here. And then just to get an idea of the mileage. So at this point, we're going to potentially be going off trail here. So let's just make a waypoint up to here somewhere first, just so it includes it in the total mileage if we do want to bring it up here. And then we can bring it up a little bit further, and then a little bit further. So what I usually like to do with this, so you can make it an out and back right down here really easily. What I like to do, not to get too confused, is I like, at least especially in this beginning planning phase, is to just make it a one-way, so that way you can really clearly see the mileage and also to the elevation gain, so you don't have to like divide everything by half and see where it starts going backwards and things like that. That's just what I personally like to do, but if you want to make it an out and back, you certainly can. But just make a note somewhere when you are creating the route of whether it is an out and back or a one-way, and you'll see it with these arrows here too, just so you don't mistake a trip being twice as long or half as long is what it is. So we're just gonna call this whatever we want. And so let's look at this information here. So it's a little over 3 miles with 3,200 elevation gain. 3,200 feet elevation gain. So that's a pretty significant approach hike, especially when you're considering that once we get to the top here, we're talking, 11,500 feet, which you can see from these elevation markers here. Hiking at that high elevation and carrying all the camera gear and doing it 7.5 miles, over 3,000 feet elevation gain, all of that to me says overnight backpacking trip. Because if we were to try to hike this either to be up on this ridgeline for sunset and then hike all the way back out to the trailhead in the dark, or start in the middle of the night and hike to this ridgeline before sunrise. That just seems a little bit too much, because you'd have to start probably 1, 2 in the morning at the trailhead and hike in the dark the whole time to get here for sunrise, at least, I would think. And I can tell you now, I did do the trip carrying camera gear, and it took me 5 hours from the trailhead to get to this ridge. So right now sunrise is starting at 6:30 in the morning. So if you wanted to get there by 5:30 or 6, again, you'd have to leave by 1 in the morning. So that doesn't seem too feasible to me. So what this says to me is this trip to get to this access point is going to be an overnight backpacking trip. Now, at this stage in the planning process, if you don't have the gear, knowledge, capabilities to do an overnight backpacking trip in this elevation or in this mileage or elevation gain, you can either plan a new trip, see if you can figure out a different access point, or learn those skills in order to do this trip. In my particular case, I do believe I have the gear, knowledge, and everything to do the trip. So we're going to continue the planning from here. But at least from here on out, we know what kind of trip it's going to have to be. So let's go ahead and save this route here. And now this is a really cool trick here that I like to do. With this route, we can go ahead and click on this route here. And we're going to bring this route over to Google Earth to see from a bird's eye view with the satellite of what this whole route should look like. I think this is a really cool thing here. So we're going to hit export here, and we're going to export it as a KML. That's just the extension or whatever it is that allows us to bring this over into Google Earth. So we're going to hit download here. And then if we make Google Earth not full screen, so then we can see the downloads here, this KMM file, we can just drag it straight over into Google Earth. And you see that teal route now? That's the exact route that we just made in Gaia in Google Earth. So we can see the road here, the trailhead, and the whole route. I think this is an amazing way to see and view your trips and expeditions, especially if you're trying to do it for photography. And I'll show you why here this is so important. So we're gonna go ahead and save this, and you can, this isn't gonna be a Google Earth video, but there's certain folders and stuff you can save if you want, if you're planning multiple trips, or if you're just saving one, you can just save it as whatever. But I'm gonna go ahead and save it using my particular method. All right, so now at this point, we determined our access point and how we're gonna get there for golden hours. So at this stage of the trip planning process, I still continue to work backwards. The next thing I believe that we would want to figure out would be camping. So where we can potentially set up the campsite, and then from there, again, kind of work backward. There's a few ways to do this, and every trip is going to be different. In this particular case, again, it's a wilderness area, so we can kind of camp, we can camp wherever we want. A few things that I like to look for when determining backpacking campsites, especially when it comes to a photography trip like this. So of course we want it to be as close to our potential access point as we possibly can get, because that way it'll just be so much easier for sunset and especially at sunrise to be as close as possible. You don't want to be hiking really far back to your tent after sunrise when it's dark. And you also too don't want to wake up if it's cold and rainy or whatever in the morning to hike up to a potential site. It's much easier if your tent can kind of be right there, or at least really close, to kind of just roll out of the tent and you're right there ready to. And also too, you can look out of your tent or look through my tent has a little flat thing to see if the conditions are right before you even get out of your tent. Knowing that, so obviously from there we know that we want to be as close to this access point, which we determined to be right here, as possible. So what we're looking for is flat, obviously, what kind of material the ground is, whether it's big rocks, little rocks, grass, how exposed it'll be to the weather, whether if there's trees nearby or if there's some sort of little cavities we can potentially put the tent in, or if it's just going to be straight up on a ridgeline with nothing else surrounding it to where it can be exposed to wind and rain or whatever else the mountains can throw at you. Determining those three things, we're going to try to find the best, at least potential area as we can. Again, you don't really know until you're there in person, but I like to be as prepared as possible before you get there, because you're going to get enough curveballs thrown at you while you're out there. So you might as well be as planned as possible while you're in this nice air-conditioned room looking at it on your computer screen. Starting here, looking all up along here, so I can tell already, so this would be a lot more, so this looks relatively flat, but where you can really tell is on your topo map with these lines here. So a lot of relatively flat areas along here. So this could all potentially be campsites. I don't see any water, except right here looks like there might be some water, which would be really nice along here. So these could all be very well protected campsites. Downside is I don't imagine there's any views of the mountains here to the left. Again, this over here to the left here is where we're looking to photograph. So we'll be pretty far away from the access point up here. There won't be any views of the mountains, but it will be pretty well protected because you're in this valley down here and there's a lot of trees around here. But we're gonna try to get a little bit closer to where we can actually see the mountains, see what's going on. So we're gonna try to get up a little bit higher if possible, but that's really good to know. And you can even, if you want to, you can even put a waypoint there anywhere along here and put something like potential first campsite area. So absolute worst case, if you get there and nothing's feasible up here or it's really windy, absolute worst case, you can set up the tent here and hike a mile or so, whatever it could be, in the morning or after sunset or before sunset to get there. So there we have a waypoint for potential first campsite, but let's keep looking to see if we can find something a little bit closer. So if you remember, if you look up here, so this is switchbacking right here up here. So this is probably nowhere feasible up here because this is really steep right here. So it either have to be somewhere in the valley here or somewhere up here if possible. So we're gonna look up here and it looks like there is potential around here because it looks like there should be a little bit of trees here, some little bushes around here, and it does start to flatten out right here. So this could definitely potentially be a good campsite. So let's just go down here and see. Let's just go down here and see if we can get a little bit of a closer look to see what that might look like. So again, this is great because we have the actual view of what this looks like. So this is an incredible resource in this particular case. So looking around here, it does look really flat in this section actually. So nowhere along here would be good campsites because this is just too thick of brush and stuff. So we obviously would have put a tent anywhere along there. There doesn't look quite flat, but when I look down in here, it looks like there could be potential down in here. So this, it flattens out right here. This is just short grass in this area, and there's trees all along here for protection. So all along here looks like a very good potential campsite here. So that is right along here in this section right here. So we're gonna make another waypoint here. So that gets us even closer to our access point, which is most likely gonna be up here. So now let's look up here at the access point. So let's just click where it's at, copy and paste the coordinates in the Google Earth, and see what that looks like. All right, so just looking here, the material looks good. It doesn't look like there's too big of rocks or anything, so it looks like you can stake anywhere along here. It does look really flat all along this edge here. So really anywhere up here, we could set up a tent. It will be exposed up here for sure. So we'll have to deal with the wind most likely. We can look at the actual days and weather here in a second, but either way, it's gonna be exposed up here, it's gonna be windy. So some things, if we did camp up here, obviously we have to figure out or make sure that our tent can handle the wind, how windy it's gonna be, and really definitely make sure that we're not gonna be up here during a storm. If there's a forecast for rain, that's fine. If there's a forecast for a thunderstorm, I don't wanna be anywhere up here at all. What I would do no matter what is just never camp up here or plan to camp up here if there's a forecast for a thunderstorm at all. I'm gonna make one more waypoint for the potential campsite up here. And the reason why we're doing this, you never want to just have one option for anything. Redundancy is everything when it comes to planning trips like this, especially when you're out here in a wilderness area by yourself like this. You need to be super self-sufficient, and one of the best ways you can do that is to have backup plans and then backup plans to those backup plans. because it's super important. You don't want to only just plan for up here and then it starts thunderstorming or something and you have no backup plan. So, you know, obviously the most important thing is to be safe, but you also don't want to, you know, you don't want to do all this work to come out here and not be productive. So at the very least, we know, like at this campsite here, so let's talk about what we don't know until we do the trip. We don't know if we can make it up to this ridge. It's just so hard to tell without seeing it in person if there's no trail going there or anything. So we don't want to just make a trip plan and just bank on making it up this ridge. And then if we aren't able to make it up this ridge, the whole plan is, or the whole trip is basically ruined, at least in terms of for photography or for views or whatever it is. We want to have a backup plan for sure, especially when it comes to unknowns like this. This particular trip, the backup plan is pretty easy because right here in this pass, there's still great views of the mountains. And we saw that on Google Earth when we went down to the ground level here. So we know, worst case, if we can't make it up to the actual ridge line, we can just set up a tent here and then have great views still in photography opportunities of the mountains here. And if we can't camp here for some reason, we'll be able to camp down here in the valley and then just hike up here in the morning or for sunset and still have those views. So, and again, anywhere along this process, you can make any notes that you want so that you remember everything out in the field. For me, I know just having these waypoints, and I'm gonna show you here in a second, we're gonna download all this into our phones to have all this information on Gaia and on the topo map on our phones out in the field. But feel free at any point during this trip planning process to just make as many notes as you want so you don't go out in the field and forget kind of actually what you were thinking. Because when you're up there and you're tired and there's high altitude and you can't breathe and there's rain and it's cold and windy, you don't want to, you always can't remember what you were thinking whenever you're, again, in this nice air-conditioned room, comfortable on your big screen computer. So you want to make as much notes as you possibly can. But having said that, the next thing that I want to look for here is we can look for water availability along the trail. And so that we can start planning, we can get more and more detailed as to how much water we need to bring, how much food, things like that. But we'll first be determined that this is most likely going to be a two-day, one-night trip. With water, you want to carry as little water as possible because it weighs a lot. But at the same time, we're going to be going up above tree line and staying there for a while. So we want to keep that in mind too. And again, I already did this trip. But this is what I figured out before I even started the trip, and then it ended up being exactly that when I was on the trip. So you can see on the GPS map here, there's water crossing here on the trail, there's some here potentially, there's some here. So all these little blue lines here are water crossings, and anywhere it interlaps with the trail is potential water sources. Having said that, you cannot always just rely on the topo map. You don't know when the topo map was made to show this water source. Certain time of year, there could be a huge river, it could be an actual river crossing on the trail, and then other times of year it's completely dry. So you don't just want to rely on your topo map, but you can usually get a really good idea using the topo map, using things like AllTrails to where you can have people reviewing the certain trails to see if there is or isn't water at that certain time. Also too, going back to redundancy, having an actual physical map of the area is huge because it just gives you a different topo map, and usually those different topo maps have different information. So the more information you can gather on this trip, the better. I would, no matter what, always we're gonna download these topo maps on our phones before this trip, but again, you always wanna have redundancy, physical map, and know how to use it, and know how to use a compass for trips like this out in the wilderness. So again, I would look at, the physical map, look at this map, and just get an idea of what the potential water sources could be, how frequently they are on the trail, what mile points there are. And you can make waypoints along the trail here to see where there's potential to fill up water. And then the most important part when it comes to this particular trip is where our last where we feel confident that our last water source is gonna be. Because again, I wanna carry as little water as possible while I'm hiking because it's really heavy, but we do not wanna be up above tree line for the night with 8 ounces of water. And there's a very high chance there's not gonna be any water up here. You can see in the top of the map, there's no water showing up here. And it makes sense because you're 11,500 feet. So usually when you're hiking up in the valleys, there's plenty of water sources. Once you get up past tree line, not so much. For an overnight like this, I would like to have 3 liters of water by the time I get to the campsite. And I like to, just as a general rule I like to do in this particular case, I like to have 2 water sources before, like looking at 2 different water sources on the map and filling up for the night at that water source. And I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but this is what I mean here. So again, if we're starting backwards here, so we're looking along the trail for water sources. And that one's potentially 1. So there's 1. I wouldn't count these right here because they're just so short. You have no idea what those actually are, especially this time of year. And then here's the second one. So what I would do, and what I ended up doing, is I don't want to rely on this water source being available. I will say it was available, because again, I did the trip, it was available, but I don't want to rely on that because the one before that is this water source down here. So I don't want to skip grabbing more water at this water source just to have lighter weight to make it here, and then get here and realize that this water source is dried out this time of year, and then the only thing I'd be able to do is hike all the way back here to this water source and then all the way back. To me, that risk is not worth carrying less water weight. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense to carry 4 liters of water starting from the trailhead coming all the way up here. It just doesn't, especially in an overnight trip. You have your tent with you, your camera gear, it's already a heavy pack. What I'm gonna do, in this water source right here, this is where I'm gonna stock up all my water for the whole rest of the night and morning. So again, we're gonna make a waypoint right there. And we can make a note right here, 3 liters. Again, just so you have everything figured out now while we have a good frame of mind before we're out in the field and trying to make these decisions on the fly. How much water, where's the next water source, things like that. So we're gonna know where we need to hike to in order to fill up for our whole 3 liters in order to carry it all the way up above tree line to stay for the night. Also, having said that, you need to know whenever you're planning out a time frame of how long it should take you to get up here, those are some things to keep in mind. Starting at this point right here, we're gonna have overnight gear, a tent, camera gear, and 3 liters of water. So we're gonna have a heavy pack right here, and it starts to get steep right here, and you start to get high altitude, 11,000 feet. So a lot of the times you can try to average 2 miles an hour, but just know once you reach this point, you might be going 1 mile an hour or less. So again, just to make sure you have plenty of time to get up here and set up your shelter before sunset, keep that in mind. Don't just say, oh, this is 7 hours, it should take me 3.5 hours to get, or 7 miles, it should take me 3.5 miles to get there. It's more complicated than that, especially because this point right here, and I can tell you because I did this trip, once I filled up here, this last section where it started getting really steep and high altitude, I slowed down a lot, which is fine because I budgeted out the time in order to still get there with plenty of time to set up my shelter before sunset. So we have the water all figured out. So we can start making notes here. So start with 8 ounces water. We know where all the water sources are, so it's gonna be a 2-day trip. Because it's a 2-day trip, if you wanna be safe, depending on your risk level, you can bring 2.5 to 3 days of food, whatever you want. So 2.5, you can bring just 2 if you really just wanna, save weight, 2.5 if you want a middle ground, 3 if you really wanna be safe. It's usually a good rule of thumb to carry 1 day's extra food at least. So 2.5 to 3 days of food. Yeah, so at this point we know where we're going, where we're camping, where we're gonna photograph, at least general areas. we'll learn more when we're out in the field. We know where we're going to get water, we know the trail we're doing, we know how many miles it is. So now we can really start boiling down the logistics even back further. So we figured out where we're camping, where we're photographing, where we're getting water. Now we're basically making our way to the trailhead. So I like to, on the notes here, I like to write down the name of the trailhead and the GPS coordinates, so I have that ready to go. Because you don't want to be out with no service and just trying to figure out like, where's the trailhead, what's it called, how do I get there? So we're gonna go to the topo map again. So, okay, it's called West Branch Trailhead, so we're just gonna write that here. And I'd like to put GPS coordinates right below it, so we can click on the trailhead and copy and paste these GPS coordinates right here. So we can easily put that in Google Maps or Apple Maps, whatever you use in order to get there. So we have the name of the trailhead and the GPS coordinates. You can, if you want, you can write down the names of roads to get there, things like that. I usually don't, I usually just do with the trailhead itself, but you can do that at this point if you want to. So now at this stage, at least on the, on the computer side of things, I feel really good about this plan so far. It seems like a really good, well thought out planned trip. And you can study it as much as you want on Google Earth. If you want to, you can, sometimes it's nice if you can, get a visual, the hike looks like from a bird's eye view. So while you're doing it, you can kind of understand where you're at, especially if you're considering your east, west, north, south, so you can know, again, we're gonna have GPS downloaded, we're gonna have a compass and map, but it's always good to have that kind of spatial awareness of where you're going, where you're at, where the road is, where the trailhead is, so you can, at this point, you can study the route itself if you want to. From here, we're gonna bring stuff over into the phone side of things, because this is what we're gonna have when we're out in the field, when we're driving there, when we're out in the field, this is what we're gonna have is the phone. So we're gonna basically bring this computer stuff over onto the phone, and most importantly, we're gonna download everything so we have it available when we inevitably don't have service. So at this point, I like to just start making some to-dos here, because you could be planning this out in multiple days potentially. So at this point, we want to make some checklists of what we need to do in order to do this trip successfully. And I also like to make this part of the to-do checklist, because these are the type of things I usually, if I do forget something, it's usually this. I'll forget to download the topo map, or I'll forget to download Google Drive, things like that. Or tell someone where I'm going. I'm really bad at not doing that, and I'm trying to work on that. So we're gonna start making some checklists of what we need to do before we go on this trip. So the first one is tell someone, and I'll show you how to do this really efficiently here in a second. So tell someone the logistics of your trip, where you're going, when you're going, and especially if you have backup plans of what the backup plan is as well. We're gonna download the Gaia GPS on our phone of exactly what we just looked at. So we have all of this information on our phone downloaded, so we have it ready to go in the field. If you haven't already, I'd like to make a note to buy a physical map. You can buy these online usually. There's an REI near your location. We're also gonna download, and I'll show you how to do that. We're gonna download Google Drive in that area, in the trailhead area. So if we know where we're gonna run out of cell service, we wanna be able to have Google Drive available to give us directions no matter where we're at, whether we have service or not. We can put on here to charge all of the electronics we're gonna be using. So for me, that's a phone, a portable charger, your camera, whatever it is. A lot of these things too are kind of things where you're thinking about now, to where whenever you're planning everything the day of or the night before, you might potentially forget. And these are I just know these because these are usually things I have forgotten before, like to re-up charging everything, or to tell someone where you're going, things like that. You put research conditions, and I'll show you how to do that very soon here. But again, this will be something that you most likely do when it becomes a little bit closer to your trip. So right now, if you're planning it kind of far out, it won't do you too much good. I mean, you can look at like the average for the month or whatever, temperature and things, but when we get closer, we want to research the conditions. So last thing, you can, stock up on whatever gear you might be bringing, like stock up your med kit, things like that. Make sure that things in your med kit aren't expired, or or maybe you used something in last trip and you forgot to re-up it, so those are always just good things to check. Again, for trips like this, when you're gonna be out there by yourself in a wilderness area. So we kind of got a checklist of things to do here. So what I can show you now on the phone side of things is how to download the Topo map with all the waypoints that we just looked at, as well as downloading Google Drive so that we know how to get there. Also, that reminds me, this is completely optional, but what I like to do is download some shows, movies, audiobooks, podcasts, whatever. So again, this is obviously completely optional, but I like when I'm in the tent to watch some Netflix or, But for now, let's shoot over to the phone and I'll show you quickly how to download some stuff onto there to really prepare for this trip. All right, so now we can go ahead and look at our phones here. And I personally use an iPhone. I'm sure it's relatively similar. It might be exactly the same. I'm not sure with if you use Android. But one thing I forgot to mention is that whatever Topo map you're using, in this case it's Gaia, before you started doing any of that, and I'm sorry I forgot to mention this, is you should have a login, create your own account on there. And I don't know if it makes you do that by default or not. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I signed up for it, but the reason for that is that if you're using the Topo map on your computer and then you download the app on your phone using the same login credentials, it'll sync and bring everything over. So now we're going to look at the same website app now. So now it's an app here on the phone of Gaia. And you'll see, looking at the phone here, we have all the exact information that we just did on the computer. So the exact route is over here, all the water sources, potential campsites and everything. And if this is not showing up, you just want to make sure that it's synced. And it just does this periodically, but if you want to force it, you can go into settings, and then under account here, you can force it to sync. So here we have it set up to sync, but it shows last sync at 4:30 or whenever, and then you can tap there to manually sync it if you want, to bring all the information that you did on your computer over to your phone. And now what we want to do here is download this map onto our phone. So we have the information whenever we don't have service. How to do that? So first we're gonna choose a few layers that we want, map layers essentially, that we want in our download. So the obvious layer here is the default Gaia Topo map. But a layer that I really like to also include in the download is this cell coverage layer. So for me, it's T-Mobile, but you can choose Verizon, AT&T, all of them, whatever you have. And I like to layer that on. And the reason for that is kind of like a very absolute just in case. So you can have an idea if something bad happens while you're out there, you can at least have a general idea of where there may potentially be cell phone service. So in this particular case, over here to the left side, there's a chance, and this obviously isn't exact or complete, but it'll at least give you an idea of there's a chance that if you make it over anywhere along here, anywhere there's pink along here, you could potentially have cell service if you need to text someone or make a call or something if there's an emergency. I always bring a little spot type thing. It's not the spot, but it's the satellite button that you press, and I obviously with a trip like this recommend that more than anything. But I just not like to have that layer on there. It doesn't take any memory hardly. I like to have that layer on the download as to, again, just to have it just in case of where you might be able to have cell service if you really need it. So we have the Topo map, the cell service. I don't really think in this particular trip you really need any other layers on here, but you can add as many layers as you want to this download. But anyway, what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit this plus here in the top, and then we're gonna hit download maps. And we're gonna see here that it's all red, and it's because I already downloaded it. But for you, you can just spread this out as big or as little as you want. So obviously you wanted to make it pretty substantially bigger than the route itself, because if you would really need it, you'd be off route, which obviously you want to avoid. But
you don't want to just do the small area around your route and then you leave that area and then you don't have cell service to view your GPS or topo map. So you want to do a pretty big area here. And if you just do layers like the cell service and the topo itself, it really takes, so you see this huge area right here, it only takes less than 8 megabytes to download, which is nothing. So, and then you would hit save there and it would download there. I'm not gonna do it again because I already did it. But what that would do is when you're out in the field, you'll have all this information right here that we're looking at now out in the field with no service, which is great. And I think even if you have service in a trip like this, you should just airplane mode your phone anyway, just save battery. And it'll have an arrow when you're actually out there, anywhere along the trail here, it'll have an arrow. And if you hold your phone, kind of flat like this and just turn it, it'll turn the arrow on your screen. So like if you come to this intersection, for example, you can just open this up with no service on airplane mode, kind of turn your phone and that arrow will show you. So if you point to the right, for example, it'll show the arrow pointing to the right on here and you'll know that you need to go in that direction. And then of course too, you can always check where you're at. Again, the arrow will follow you using satellite and GPS that you don't need service for. And you'll know how close you are to that last water source. You'll be able to see all your waypoints that we just made of when to fill up water, where the potential campsites are, and where's the access points to photography and things like that. So we got that downloaded. And then next we're gonna do is download Google Drive in that area, because if we look at the cell service here, we will see that we won't have service really anywhere around here. There's the trailhead itself, there's the main road, and anywhere that's pink, you'll have potentially service. So we won't have service anywhere around here. So we're just gonna download Google Drive. And of course too, again, you can write in your notes the road names, directions, everything, which sometimes I do that as well. But I like to just go into Google Maps here. You can go into Google Maps, scan around, search, whatever you need to do to find where you're going. So right here is that trailhead. So we can just zoom out and see the main road, see that road up there. And if you hit your account in the top right and then hit offline maps, you can hit select your own map. So this will give you directions just like always on Google Maps. The only thing it won't do is traffic updates, which won't matter out here because there's like many traffic. So this is a huge step that really just simplifies your trip, because you can just, again, you don't have to worry about trying to see the road names and where the turns are and things like that. You can just put it in and have the GPS that tells you exactly where to go and when. So this is another great, easy thing to do. So you can just download Google Maps as well, and we can mark that off of our checklist. And again, this is why I like using reminders, because it's all on the phone, ready to go. It's in the cloud. It syncs right over. So we have the trip to do, and we have the download Gaia done. I bought a physical map, and we have download Google Drive. So, and again, I like having this just like right here, ready to go. So even like the day or the day before the trip, whatever, I can remember like, oh, I need to charge electronics, or oh, I need to tell someone about the trip coming up, anything like that. Or maybe it's even just like, I'd like to download some Netflix shows. All right, now let's say it's a few days before your planned trip date, and we have everything planned out, downloaded on our phone, everything else. So the next step on our to-do list here would be to research the conditions and really the weather conditions, and we can even look at quickly some lighting stuff potentially too. There's a couple resources I really like to use for looking up weather conditions in specifically in mountain environments, because it is tough. So if you just look at, just regular, whenever you use traditional weather services and service apps, you have the weather app in Apple, you have the Weather Channel, AccuWeather, whatever you use, you always have to put in a city or a town in order for the weather to come up. And so the problem with that in these kind of trips and these kind of environments is that it's really not really close to much of anything. And not only that, but you're in different elevations, which completely changes the dynamic of the weather. So if you look at Google Maps here, we're up around here during this trip. So there's not really any towns that are that particularly close, but we can put in like, you know, the regular weather app. So let's just go to one of those now. But I still do this. This is definitely part of the weather planning, because you just really want as many resources as you can have spread out in order to get as best idea as you possibly can of what the weather might be, as unpredictable as it always is in the mountains above tree line. But so we can just queue up a few things here. We can queue up so regular weather thing, and if you have 2 or 3 of these, it's even better. But for now, let's just do, you know, the weather channel here. And then for mountain stuff, high altitude stuff, I like to use a software or a website called Windy. I think it's really great for high altitude stuff. And then I'll show you this here in a second, but we're also going to use mountain-forecast.com. This is a great resource if you can use it. I'll show you why it's very specific, but if you can use it in your particular trip, it's a great resource to use. But first, let's just look at the regular weather channel. So if we just look at the Google Maps around the area, so we see this town right here, that's pretty close. We can put that in. We can just look at the, you know, whenever your trip is, of what it's showing. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind, so if you do this, look at your topo map and look at the elevation of the town. So this is the town here that we just put in. So if you click on the map just around where it's at, it'll show you the elevation. So this town is at 8,200 feet. So you want to keep that in mind. If you're looking at here, the weather at 8,200 feet, you're going to be over here at 11,200 feet. So you're going to be 3,000 feet higher. So again, I still like to look at the weather in the nearby towns because it's still a good general idea. And especially too, if the weather is showing thunderstorms in all the nearby towns, it's most likely going to be thunderstorming too, 3,000 feet higher. So I still definitely like to look at the weather in the nearby towns. But if the weather in the nearby towns is showing just cloudy or sunny and nice, that's when I like to use other resources too that are more specific, like Windy and Mountain Forecast, to see if there's a potential up higher, 3,000 feet higher, if it could be something else. It could be raining or thunderstorming, even though it could be nice down in the valleys. And then what I like to use is Windy, and what you can do is using Windy. And there's a whole other thing of how to use this, but just know this is a resource available. But you would scroll down to that area. So here's the mountain range here. Put on different layers. The main one I like to look at is rain and thunder. And then you can look at certain days and certain times to see what its prediction is specifically up high in the mountains. So what's great about this app is that it'll really show you if there's, let's just put the temperature on so you'll see the difference. So you'll see the mountain range kind of here, and it'll really show you the difference in weather in the towns down in the valleys, and then the weather in the mountains up high. Now in these particular days, there's not huge differences, but certain days, certain times of the year, you'll see whether it's thunderstorms or much colder temperature or higher winds, specifically higher winds. Using Windy is great because you'll see it on the map here in the higher elevations where you're gonna be compared to how it's completely different here in the valley. So this is a great resource to use if you're going up in higher elevations. You can look at the temperatures, the potential thunderstorms, and what this app is really great for wind, obviously is what it's called, Windy, but you can look at the wind up high, things like that. And then if you're lucky enough to be doing your trip nearby a relatively popular mountain, then you can use this resource, which is mountain-forecast.com. And this resource is great. So you just scroll around, you can put in the mountain range and look from there. So we're gonna go up here. So we happen to know that our trip is going to be right along here, and this particular mountain right here is very, very close, and it's a very similar elevation to where we're actually going to be. So we see Clark Peak here. So if we look at our topo map and search for that, you can see where it's at relative to where we're gonna be potentially camping. So we see right here is the peak, and it is at 12,900 feet. And then we see our trip is gonna be right here at 11,200 feet. So I would just take whatever the weather is showing here and prepare for that, or more likely prepare for worse than that, because you know, it'll probably be better weather 1,000 feet lower, but you never want to prepare for better weather. You want to prepare for worse weather. So anyway, we're going to keep that in mind. But because this is close enough, this is very valuable to see what the weather and temperature is going to be like at the summit, most likely. And that'll be drastically different than what it'll be if you look up at the nearby town, 4,000 feet lower. So if that's available, depending on your trip, which it is at this trip, this is a great resource, specifically for the wind. And you can look at the, if it's gonna be sunny, cloudy, rainy, thunderstormy in the morning, sunset, or at night, the highs and lows, the freezing. I'm not gonna do a whole video, you know, going on about this resource, but just know it's available and it's a great resource. And for this particular trip, so again, I already did the trip. I took a risk. What the weather looked like for me before I took this trip was that the night, on the PM of the day I was planning on going, it was switching back and forth between rain and cloudy every day. I looked at this about 3 or 4 days every day before my trip. And it kept switching back and forth between, you know, cloudy and rainy for sunset the first night. And in the morning, and then it was always showing raining at night. And in the morning, it would switch back between, again, cloudy and rainy. And then during the day, the second day, it was 100% supposed to rain and even snow later on. And I took a risk because I was hoping to, because it was kind of going back and forth, I was hoping to catch it to where I would be able to be there kind of in between rains, which is sometimes really cool lighting, especially around, you know, like sunset time. And the day before the trip, it showed, on PM, it showed cloudy, at night it showed rainy, and then in the morning it showed cloudy. So that seemed like really good potential conditions for photography. It was also showing relatively high wind. I think it was at 25 miles an hour. So relatively high wind, but not too cold of temperatures. The temperatures are around this, which is, for the gear I have, this is very doable. Feels like 25, low of 36. So it was probably something like that where I was camping, but again, with my gear, it was very doable. That was what the weather looked like before I did the trip. What ended up happening is as soon as, and I'll show you in the infield here very soon, but what ended up happening was as soon as I basically got to the campsite, it rained, and it rained all night. And which is fine. So I got a black and white on the way up because I just wanted to get something, because I had a feeling it could rain at any moment. So I didn't want to wait for sunset. So, but in the morning it cleared up. And then by the time I got to my car, it did rain exactly when it was supposed to, showing on here. And then I don't know if it snowed later that night or not, because I left at that point. So it just goes to show that this is very accurate. I just got a little unlucky because it rained just a little bit earlier than what I was hoping, but I knew that risk going in because I used this resource. So I knew what the wind was going to be like, and I had a really good idea of what the rain was going to be like. Most importantly, I knew it was going to rain and not thunderstorm. That was my main concern. So you can look at this and see what you're comfortable with, what temperatures you're comfortable with, what wind. If you are looking for cloudy or potentially raining, sporadic rain, you know. So this is a great resource to use to figure out kind of the weather conditions. And then lastly, for big mountain ranges like this, I don't like to use this too much because I like to just go out there and just kind of see what happens. That's usually, but if you look at your access point here on Google Earth up here, so you can just come down here and then look up at the mountain range here. What you can do for lighting and for the sun, you can go up here and you can hit view and then sun. And then what you can do is you can toggle for that exact time of year you're going to be there, and really for that exact day, but you can toggle basically and view the sun. So you can see, you know, for sunset, where the sun's going to be setting and where it's going to be hitting at sunrise. So looking at this, we can see that the sun is going to be hitting the mountains during sunrise relatively early, so you can get that warm light on the mountains for sunrise. And that reminds me of another point. It's just a quick, easy thing to do while you're out there. So it does show you on Gaia the sunrise and sunset, but you can also too just put in your notes for the thing of when sunrise and sunset is for that time to put on here. And you can also put on here any notes too that you want about the conditions. So now at this stage, we've planned everything out. We would just look at our checklist here, you know, the day before or whenever, the day of the trip itself, and make sure that our med kit's stocked up, our electronics are charged, make sure we tell someone where we're going. And again, that's another thing you can do on Gaia on your phone, is the route that you just created. You can just click on the route on your phone and hit share and text it to whoever you want, and it'll show the exact route with a link. So if something were to happen to you, that person can just send that link to whoever needs it, and it'll show exactly what your planned route was, along with waypoints, along with backup plans, things like that. So that makes it really easy to tell someone when and where exactly you're going to be going. Now that we did all of that, I'm going to show you now, actually, again, I did this trip just a few days ago. I'm going to show you now in the field of me completing this trip, so you can kind of see it from the planning stage on Google Earth and on the topo map and everything, and what it looks like in real life when we're out there. So I'm going to show you now in the field. In this video clip, I've completed the hike, the 7.5 miles in, and it's, I believe, about an hour before sunset by the time I start filming while I'm out there. And just before we get to this stage, the water situation was exactly what I thought it would be. I carried 8 ounces the whole way and just drank along the way. And then that second to last water source, I filled up 3 liters. It just so happened that there was water at that last source that we looked at, and there was also water right along the ridge line, just like a little pond thing. But really glad though that we filled up when we did, just in case, so I wasn't worrying about there not being water up there and having to backtrack. So yeah, at this stage I'm up there, 3 liters of water, getting ready to set up camp. And I did take, on the way up there, I did take one black picture. I knew I'd turn to black and white because it was really starting to cloud up. And I was a little nervous that it was gonna rain at sunset, so I just wanted to grab at least one picture just to get it out of the way, just in case, because I would hate to do all this planning and hiking and everything and not get at least one. So anyway, we'll go now into the field. Called a audible up top here. Originally we were talking about going up behind the camera here, up this ridge line here, and then taking a picture of the mountains off of it. I'll show you why here in a second, and we were planning on setting up the tent and everything up there as well. I'll show you here in a second as to why I changed my mind with that. So I found this nice spot here. It's pretty flat. We're still really high up, 11,200, right by the mountains right there. We're still what I would be considered above tree line, but we still have like some little tiny short trees here, which will hopefully help with wind, because it is a little windy today, and it's also been raining off and on. We'll see what happens there, but for now we're gonna get the tent set up right here, and then I'll kind of show you around the area and kind of show you what we're working with here.
All right, so it's actually raining pretty good now, as it tends to do in the mountains sometimes. It's like 6 or something, I think. So I got the tent set up. But that's what's nice about having this big 4-season tent, is I have this huge vestibule area here. So I was just able to bring all my stuff inside here, and then I'll just be able to take my time and be in the tent while I set everything up, like my quilt and sleeping pad and everything. There's even another vestibule on that side as well, if I need it. But we're just gonna, for now, get set up in here, stay dry, and then worst case, I will see you in the morning, because hopefully it's a little bit better conditions tomorrow morning, but we'll see.
All right, so it's morning now. It pretty much, well, it did rain all night, but it cleared up nice this morning. So here is that
ridge that we were originally planning on climbing. So looking at it in person, I think that you could definitely switch back up this, no problem. The reason that I didn't was that, well, number one, when I got here last night, it was rainy and windy, and it's, you know, really exposed up there. But also too, there's a lot of this, I don't know if you can see up there, I'll go up there in a second. There's a lot of yellow down here, so I kind of figured to incorporate that. And the campsite we got, again, I'll show you here in a second, it's right over the hill there, but a little bit down in those trees. It was a good shelter to kind of block the wind a little bit and rain, so I figured this was a better spot for today. But what I would like to do is come back whenever these mountains here have snow on them. I would like to climb up this ridge right here, and I might climb up this morning just to see what it's like, but I'd like to climb up this ridge, set up camp up there, and then shoot across at a wide angle of these mountains covered in snow. I think that'd be a better time to go up there with no foreground or anything, but I kind of figured for now, stick down here where I can get some yellow or something in the foreground and a little bit more protected out of the elements. So again, here's the ridge we were going to walk up. I'll show you where we ended up setting up camp. So here's that yellow I was talking about. Thinking of maybe incorporating some of that in some foreground. Something like that whenever the sunrise hits those mountains there. But I'll keep coming down here to show you where the tent's set up. So there's the tent down there, if you can see it. A bright orange thing. So you can tell there's a little bit of a mountain, a little hill here with a bunch of trees. And then there's a little bit of bushes and stuff to the left of the tent. So I kind of figured nestled in there a little bit would help with the wind a bit. Alright, so we just had some breakfast, I had some coffee, and so I kind of figured though, but before packing up camp here, is that I'm going to go ahead and climb up that ridgeline that we were originally planning on doing, just to see kind of what the camping situation would have been like if we would have went up there, and also too to see kind of what it's like in real life versus what we researched it with Google Earth and the Topo map, to see what the terrain's like for camping, setting up a tent up there, then also seeing what it looks like from up there looking at the mountains in this direction. Just so again we can kind of compare to what I had in mind for the original trip to be when we were making the plan, and also too like for my own personal reasons, so I know what that's like for future trips. Again, I think when these mountains are covered with snow, I think up there and then back a little bit further, I don't know if I'm going to go that far back because that ridgeline goes all the way up to a summit of another mountain all the way over that direction. I don't think I'm going to go that far, but I think one day going up that far and setting up camp up there when there's snow here would make a really nice panorama shot of all these mountains covered in snow.
Alright, so for this last portion where I show where I do actually climb up on the ridge, I'm just going to do a voiceover for that because it was really windy up there. And also too, I apologize for the shaky video. I'm going to change my gear and technique for in-field video recording from here on out. But here we are on top of the ridge and there's a view of the tent from up there. And here I'm just showing where we hiked down along the actual trail where we showed before. And then right at the end here, we were able to very easily just walk basically right up the ridge from back there. And once we're up here, we can go anywhere up there if we want to. And it goes pretty far back that way, about a mile and a half. So we can go anywhere along this ridge here. And here's what it looks like in person versus Google Earth on what the mountain range looks like from on top of the ridge. And then there's a popular regular backpacking trip here that would be like kind of a normal trip you would do. And I just wanted to show like from this angle where it'd be better to be up on this ridge for photography stuff, because if you're down that close to those mountains shooting kind of up at them, it wouldn't be as ideal as being this far away looking at the mountains from the ridge. And here I'm just showing the actual ridge itself, and just quick little locations, like right there you can definitely set up a tent and be blocked from the wind a little bit, and it's flat and you can put tent stakes right in there. And just to conclude, yeah, this trip was great. I'm glad we did all this research, because being able to be in this kind of location with these views and everything all by yourself, and being able to be there for sunrise and sunset and everything it was a great trip.